This wasn't just a quarterback announcement, and it definitely wasn't about Cleveland needing options. Because the moment Dante Moore announced he was returning to Oregon for the 2026 season, one tweet turned a routine college football decision into a full-blown controversy. Not because of what Dante said, but because of how the media framed it. When Browns reporter Mary Kay Cabot suggested that Moore's decision somehow impacted the Cleveland Browns, fans immediately saw through it. The backlash was instant and loud, because to a lot of people this didn't feel like reporting, it felt like narrative building. Let's be clear about one thing right away. Dante Moore never hinted at Cleveland. He never mentioned the NFL. He talked about preparation, development, and unfinished business at Oregon. That's it. So why were the Browns even part of the conversation? That's where this story gets uncomfortable. Because for many fans, this wasn't really about Dante Moore at all. It felt like another subtle attempt to keep the quarterback carousel spinning, another way to inject doubt around Shedeur Sanders without saying his name directly. And once you look at the timing, the wording, and the reaction, it's hard to ignore why people are frustrated. Then things escalated. A reaction from former teammate Jordan Seaton poured gasoline on the situation, reigniting debates about loyalty, money, and media agendas in modern football. So this video isn't about Dante Moore choosing Oregon. It's about how a simple decision became a manufactured storyline, and why fans are officially fed up with how quarterbacks are being talked about. And once we break it all down, the real issue becomes impossible to ignore. Lost in the noise is a simple fact that keeps getting ignored. Dante Moore didn't make a controversial decision. He made a conservative one. Returning to Oregon Ducks for the 2026 season was about development, preparation, and control over his future. Nothing more. When Dante explained his choice, his reasoning was consistent from start to finish. He talked about learning behind veterans, about not rushing the process, about wanting to enter the next level fully prepared instead of forcing the timeline. He referenced adversity, growth, and unfinished business. At no point did he hint at the NFL, and he certainly didn't hint at Cleveland. That's why the reaction caught so many people off guard. Because suddenly, a college quarterback making a normal development decision was being framed as a storyline that somehow affected the Cleveland Browns. And that framing didn't sit right with fans who have been watching this team closely. From a football standpoint, the connection never made sense. The Browns weren't publicly linked to Dante Moore. There were no reports of interest, no scouting smoke, no draft chatter tying the two together. Even if Moore had declared, league insiders widely believed he'd land elsewhere. So the idea that his return impacted Cleveland felt forced. That's where skepticism turned into frustration. Fans weren't upset about Dante staying at Oregon. Most respected the decision. What irritated them was how quickly the narrative jumped tracks. Instead of treating this as a college football story, it was reframed as an NFL problem. One that conveniently reopened quarterback conversations Cleveland fans have been begging the media to stop manufacturing. And that's the key word here, manufacturing. Because when you strip away the framing, Dante's decision doesn't change the Browns' plans, timeline, or priorities in any measurable way. It doesn't remove an option they were actively pursuing. It doesn't force a pivot. It doesn't impact anything on their board. So why phrase it that way? That question is what set this whole situation off. Not because people are anti-Dante Moore, but because they're tired of routine decisions being twisted into speculative NFL drama, especially when it always seems to circle back to the same position and the same quarterback conversations. And once fans started asking why the Browns were dragged into this at all, the focus shifted away from Dante completely. Because the more people looked at the wording, the clearer it became that this wasn't about who Dante Moore is. It was about who the media still wants Cleveland to be questioning. The fire didn't start with Dante Moore's decision. It started with one sentence. When Mary Kay Cabot posted that Dante Moore returning to Oregon impacts the Cleveland Browns, fans immediately pushed back. Not because they misunderstood the tweet, but because they understood it perfectly. Within minutes, the replies filled up with the same message. How? Fans weren't just disagreeing. They were openly mocking the logic. Some pointed out that the Browns were never linked to Moore. Others noted that Cleveland's real issues weren't quarterback availability but protection, weapons, and stability. A few went further, accusing the tweet of being clickbait designed to stir quarterback discourse where it didn't belong. And once the replies piled up, the tone shifted from confusion to frustration. Because this wasn't the first time fans felt a storyline was being nudged in a specific direction. The wording mattered. Saying a decision impacts a team implies consequence. It implies lost opportunity. It suggests a pivot needs to happen, and none of that aligned with reality. From the outside, it looked like a classic case of framing. Take a neutral event, attach it to a franchise with a volatile quarterback narrative. Let the reaction do the rest. That's why the backlash was so sharp. Fans weren't upset that a reporter covered Dante Moore. They were upset that his decision was used to reopen a conversation many feel has already been settled. And for Browns fans especially, quarterback fatigue is real. They've lived through decades of constant speculation, resets, and media-driven panic. So when this tweet dropped, it felt less like information and more like provocation. Some fans accused Mary Kay of trolling. Others said she was manufacturing controversy during the quiet part of the offseason. And while those claims are opinions, the reaction itself tells a story. This wasn't a fringe response. It was widespread. What made it worse was the silence that followed. No clarification. No explanation of how, specifically, the decision affected Cleveland. The tweet just sat there, letting assumptions fill the gap. And in today's media environment, assumptions spread fast. The longer it lingered without context, the more fans connected it to an ongoing pattern, one where Browns quarterbacks are constantly treated as temporary, uncertain, or replaceable, even when the on-field context doesn't support it. That's when this stopped being about one tweet. It became about trust, about whether fans believe coverage is meant to inform or to steer conversation in a particular direction. And once that trust breaks, even the smallest sentence can spark a very big reaction. Which brings us to why so many people felt this was less about Dante Moore and more about someone else entirely. This is where the conversation took a sharper turn. For a lot of fans, that tweet didn't exist in a vacuum. It landed on top of months of non-stop quarterback speculation surrounding Shedeur Sanders, and that context matters. Because when you've watched the media repeatedly float replacement scenarios, even subtle wording starts to feel intentional. No one explicitly mentioned Shedeur in the tweet. That's the part defenders point to. But fans weren't reacting to what was said, they were reacting to what was implied. The idea that Dante Moore's decision somehow impacted Cleveland immediately revived a familiar narrative. The Browns should still be looking for a quarterback. And that's exactly what fans are tired of. From their perspective, this wasn't about evaluating talent. It was about keeping doubt alive. Every offseason, a new name gets introduced, a new college quarterback, a new hypothetical option, and every time it chips away at stability before it ever has a chance to exist. That's why many fans read the tweet as a sideways shot. Not an attack, a reminder, a way of saying the door is still open. And when that message keeps getting repeated, it sends a signal that the quarterback already in the building isn't trusted, isn't settled, or isn't the plan long-term. Even though on the field the Browns' problems have been obvious and consistent, protection breakdowns, limited weapons, coaching instability, quarterback play hasn't existed in a vacuum. yet coverage often treats it that way. So when Dante Moore, a player with no direct tie to Cleveland, was suddenly framed as part of the Browns' story, fans connected the dots themselves. Not because they're conspiracy-minded, but because they've seen the pattern before. It's also why the reaction wasn't split down the middle. It skewed heavily one way. People weren't debating whether Moore was good. They were asking why his name was being used at all. And that frustration is amplified by timing. This happened during a quiet stretch of the offseason when speculation fills the gaps. No games, no practices, just narratives competing for attention. In that environment, even a single sentence can steer weeks of discussion. Fans believe this kind of framing does real damage. It undermines confidence. It fuels unnecessary debate, and it keeps the Browns stuck in the same loop they've been trying to escape for years. Whether that was the intent or not, the perception stuck. And once that perception took hold, it didn't take long for someone else to add fuel to the fire. Not a reporter this time, but a former teammate whose reaction reopened an entirely different debate about loyalty, optics, and modern football priorities. Just when things started to cool down, another layer got added, and this time it came from inside the circle. Former teammate Jordan Seaton reacted publicly to the Dante Moore news, and that reaction immediately set social media on fire. On its own, it might have looked harmless, but given the timing and Seaton's recent decision to enter the transfer portal, fans read it very differently. To them, it felt like trolling. Not necessarily toward Dante Moore, but toward the program and players he left behind. And once that interpretation took hold, the comments turned brutal. Fans questioned loyalty. They questioned intent. Some even framed it as clout chasing in the middle of manufactured drama. Now, to be fair, none of this is confirmed. Seaton hasn't said outright that he was taking shots at anyone. That matters. But perception is powerful, especially in an era where every emoji like or repost gets dissected. And this is where the conversation got bigger than any one player. Fans started debating what loyalty even means in modern college football. Nil money, transfer freedom, business decisions, all of it has changed the landscape. Staying put is no longer the default, it's the exception. Players are encouraged to do what's best for themselves, and most do. But that doesn't mean fans have stopped caring about optics. When players like Shedeur Sanders or Travis Hunter stick with a program through chaos, injuries, and media noise, they get praised for loyalty. When someone leaves and then reacts publicly to rival news, it hits differently, fair or not. That's why Seaton's reaction landed the way it did. It wasn't just about him transferring. It was about how his actions fit into a moment already charged with media frustration and quarterback controversy. Fans weren't looking for another spark, but they got one anyway. And here's the uncomfortable truth. In today's football ecosystem, perception often outweighs intent. Seaton may have simply been reacting to news like everyone else, but in the middle of a narrative storm, neutrality disappears. Everything gets assigned meaning, especially when fans already feel like their team and its quarterback are being subtly undermined. This is why the loyalty debate won't go away. It's not really about staying or leaving. It's about timing, messaging, and how actions are interpreted when emotions are already high. And in this case, Seaton's reaction didn't exist in isolation. It landed right on top of a fan base already fed up with how stories around their team keep getting framed. Which brings us back to the core issue. This wasn't about Dante Moore. It wasn't really about Jordan Seaton either. It was about how quickly modern football narratives spiral, and how easily media framing and player reactions can turn routine decisions into full-blown controversy. At some point, the noise starts drowning out the facts. Because when you strip away the tweets, the reactions, and the speculation, the football reality for the Cleveland Browns hasn't changed at all. The biggest issues facing this team aren't mystery quarterbacks floating in from college football. They're structural, and fans know it. Protection has been inconsistent. The offensive line hasn't held up in critical moments. Skill position depth has been thin. Coaching continuity has been shaky. Those problems show up on film every week. They don't require guesswork or off-season hypotheticals to diagnose. Yet the coverage keeps circling back to quarterback drama. That's why so many fans reacted so strongly to the Dante Moore framing. It felt like another attempt to redirect attention away from fixable football problems and towards speculative replacements. Instead of asking how to support the quarterback already on the roster, the conversation jumps to who might replace him next. And that's exhausting. From a development standpoint, constant speculation is corrosive. Quarterbacks don't grow in a vacuum. They grow with reps, continuity, and belief from the organization. When media narratives repeatedly frame the position as unsettled, even when no internal move has been made, it undermines stability before it can exist. That's the frustration fans keep voicing. They're not arguing that evaluation should stop. They're arguing that evaluation should be honest. An honest evaluation requires context. It requires acknowledging when a quarterback hasn't had a full offseason, when protection breaks down, when coaching turnover interrupts development, when expectations don't match reality. Instead, what fans often see is shortcut analysis. New name equals new hope. Old problems get ignored. The cycle resets. And the timing makes it worse. This all happened during a quiet off-season window when speculation fills airtime. With no games to analyze, narratives compete for oxygen. In that environment, even loosely connected stories get stretched until they snap. That's how a college quarterback returning to school somehow becomes a Browns storyline. The danger isn't just misinformation, it's fatigue. Fans start tuning out, trust erodes, and once people believe coverage is more about clicks than clarity, every report gets questioned, even the fair ones. This is why the pushback mattered. It wasn't about defending one player blindly. It was about pushing back against a pattern where quarterback conversations are treated like entertainment instead of development. And until the coverage starts matching the football reality on the field, these flare-ups won't stop. They'll just keep finding new names to attach to the same old noise. Here's the part that keeps getting lost every time a new quarterback name enters the conversation. A lot of Browns fans aren't defending Shedeur Sanders because they think he's flawless. They're defending him because they don't believe he's been evaluated in a fair, stable environment yet. And there's a big difference between those two things. Context matters. Shedeur didn't come into a situation with continuity. He didn't get a clean offseason where the offense was fully built around him. He didn't get consistent first-team reps. Coaching instability disrupted rhythm. Protection issues forced rushed decisions. None of that shows up neatly in stat lines, but it shows up clearly on film. Fans see that. They also see that quarterback development isn't linear. Plenty of successful NFL quarterbacks struggled early when structure failed them, then took major steps forward once the environment stabilized. That's why so many people push back when the conversation jumps straight to replacement talk. It skips the most important step, actually building something functional first. And that's what supporters keep coming back to. Give him an off-season. Give him protection. Give him real weapons. Give him coaching consistency. Then evaluate. That's not blind loyalty. That's basic football logic. What frustrates fans is how often Shedeur's name gets treated like a placeholder instead of a project worth committing to. Every speculative report, every loosely tied quarterback rumor sends the same message. This isn't settled. And when that message keeps repeating, it undermines confidence before results even have a chance to change the narrative. There's also a fatigue factor at play. Cleveland fans have lived through endless quarterback resets. New names, new hopes, same unresolved problems. So when coverage immediately pivots to who's next instead of how do we fix what's broken, patience wears thin. That's why the Dante Moore situation struck such a nerve. It wasn't about comparing players. It was about the implication that nothing has changed, that the Browns are still stuck in evaluation mode instead of commitment mode. And fans don't believe that's the right path anymore. Whether Shedeur ultimately becomes the long-term answer is still an open question. No one is denying that, but many believe he hasn't even been given the conditions required to answer that question honestly. Until that happens, every new quarterback rumor feels premature. And that's why, despite the noise, a large part of the fan base remains firm on one thing. Stop manufacturing doubt and start building clarity. Because until the environment improves, swapping names won't change the outcome. At the end of all this noise, one thing becomes painfully clear. This was never really about Dante Moore. Dante made a smart, measured decision for his own career. He stayed where he felt he could grow, prepare, and compete for championships. That's not controversial. That's football. What became controversial was how quickly that decision was pulled into an NFL narrative it didn't belong to, and how easily it reopened a quarterback debate that many fans feel has already crossed into overkill. The backlash toward Mary Kay Cabot wasn't about one tweet. It was about trust. Fans didn't feel informed, they felt nudged. Nudged toward doubt, nudged toward instability, nudged toward the same endless cycle the Cleveland Browns have lived in for decades. And that's the real frustration. Every time a quarterback rumor gets floated without context, it reinforces the idea that nothing is ever settled in Cleveland, that no one gets patience, that development always takes a back seat to speculation. Fans aren't asking for blind loyalty, they're asking for football logic. Fix the line, fix the structure, fix the coaching continuity, then evaluate the quarterback in an environment that actually makes sense. Instead, what they keep getting is noise. That noise spilled over into the Jordan Seaton situation, into loyalty debates, into arguments that had nothing to do with on-field performance. That's what happens when narratives spiral unchecked, routine decisions turn into controversies, and clarity gets buried under reaction. And in the middle of all of it sits Shedeur Sanders. Not because he demanded attention, not because he underperformed in isolation, but because his position makes him an easy target for uncertainty. When media framing constantly implies what's next instead of what's being built, confidence erodes not just for players, but for fans trying to believe the franchise is finally moving forward. This isn't about declaring Shedeur the future forever. It's about letting reality play out without manufacturing drama along the way. Because here's the truth Cleveland fans keep circling back to. Changing the name at quarterback won't fix broken foundations, and dragging unrelated stories into the conversation won't either. If the Browns want stability, it starts with messaging as much as roster moves. It starts with clarity instead of speculation. And it starts by letting football decisions breathe without turning every offseason headline into a referendum on the most fragile position in sports. Until that happens, fans will keep pushing back. Not because they hate debate, but because they're tired of watching the same cycle repeat under a different headline.